Hello everyone, welcome to our today's webinar, OPC UA Development with the .NET Standard SDK, and there especially the client development. I'm Sebastian Fischer, I'm the product manager for the dataFEED SDKs, and I'm here together with Arlene Moldovan, our senior software developer from the .NET team, who will then later give the presentation regarding client development. So first of all, some basic information regarding this webinar. You have a chat window, so there you can write all your questions and we will answer them either during the webinar or afterwards by email. So please, first I would like to test it. Can you hear and see me? And maybe you can write something in your chat window that we know everything is all right. Okay. Okay, perfect. Everything's incoming. Okay, perfect. Everything's going right. So then I will start with a short look on the agenda for today. So first of all, we will have a look on the company softing to give you a basic overview. Then we have an introduction to the dataFEED SDKs. And then later I hand over to Arlene Moldovan regarding the .NET Standard client development. So the company softing. Softing is a German middle-sized company based in Munich and on many other locations around the world. We have around 400 to 430 people, and we have a revenue about 80 million euro per year. We were founded in 1979 and are growing since then. Softing has 3 different business units: automotive, IT networks, and industrial. We are from the industrial part, so we are here for products and technology for integrated industrial production. So let's have a look on the dataFEED SDKs. Here you have a basic overview. So we have dataFEED SDKs for OPC Classic as well as for OPC UA, and we have it for Visuals for C++ and for Microsoft.NET. How's the structure of our SDKs? So we are all based on the stack of the OPC Foundation, which is available on GitHub. This is only for the OPC UA SDKs, because for the classical, there's nothing available on GitHub. On top of that, we put a custom client API, which comes from us, which simplifies everything that's inside of the stack. We have it for client, and we have it as well for server. So we make it more easy for you to develop a client and server and to integrate an OPC UA client or server into your application. All this comes together with examples and tutorials which help you to be even bigger, even faster and better in developing the client and the server. So we have a client and server for C++. There you can develop in Microsoft Visual Studio if you are developing on a Windows system, but you can also develop on a Linux system. There we have different platform layers for Linux, VxWorks, and Microsoft Windows. We have then for the .NET, we have a .NET client and server. This .NET, as you may know, is obsolete because it was discontinued by the foundation, and they said they would like to continue with the new .NET Standard. Therefore, we have also .NET Standard client and server. So the basic .NET is only available for Windows target operating system, and the .NET Standard is also available for Linux and Android if you would like to develop an application that's target operating system is an Android application, for example. If we have a look on the classical side, there we have the possibility for OPC Classic DA, also data access and alarm and events. You can develop only on Windows, as it is all based on Windows operating system, and you have the possibility for C++, C#, and Visual Basic.NET as your language. So furthermore, we bring you support in developing your application with our dataFEED OPC UA Client. So if you're developing a server, you can use it to test your server and to browse and to see if everything is working. Also, if you're developing a client, you can use our dataFEED OPC UA demo server, which has a predefined address space, and you can simply connect to it with your client and see if everything is working. So what is the sales model behind our SDKs? First of all, we have a different model between our classical SDKs and our OPC UA SDKs. Our classical SDKs are sold with a license, so you need one license for each developer, and additionally you can buy a maintenance contract, which will give you the opportunity to update your application to the latest version of our SDK. It is different for the OPC UA SDKs. There we simply have a maintenance contract, so you have to buy a maintenance contract for each developer, but then you are free to update to every version. You have the contact to our dedicated support team, and we are here to help if you have any trouble in setting up your client and server. Every SDK is available on our website for free download, and then you can test it for 90 minutes. So the 90 minutes is until you have to restart the client or server. So you can test it as long as you want. You simply have to restart after 90 minutes, and there's no time limitation or day limitation that everything is stopping working. So here we have everything combined, what I just said. So we have fast time to market because of our samples, tutorials. We have our easy simplified API. You are independent also of OPC stack changes because the API does not have to change if something is changing in the stack regarding also security related topics. We have the tutorial examples. We use it in our own products. So you may know our dataFEED suite or our dataFEED gateways. They also use our SDKs for setting up the OPC connection. The free upgrade for 3 years is because the maintenance contract runs at least for 3 years, so you can always update for three years to the latest version. This includes features and bug fixes. So if there are new features coming from the OPC Foundation, this is included as well, and you don't have to buy a new license. We guarantee full compliance with our dataFEED SDKs to the OPC standard. So with every release, we test our SDKs against the CTT, and you can be sure that everything is working fine. You have the demo version, you have the support, and we can also offer you additionally on-site training and development support if you need something. So then I would like to hand over to Ali Moldovan regarding the client development. And if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat window, and then we can answer them in between.
Okay, so I'm going to show you the implementation of a client application project developed with Visual Studio 2017 using our Softing OPC UA simplified API for client development. First of all, in the project configuration, you will have to set some dependencies for assemblies of the OPC UA client and for the Nugget packages of OPC Foundation.NET Standard stack. Afterwards, you will have to also define a configuration file, an XML configuration file with all the OPC UA specific parameters, and that it's in an XML file inside the project. Using default configuration parameters should be fine, and it should work at least for testing. Then you will need to set up your application to load the configuration from that file and create a UA application object. And afterwards, you will need to set a server URL for testing your connection. In this case, I put the URL address of our Softing UA demo server, and all you need to do is just change the address. In this case, it's connecting to our Softing UA demo server. Further on, you will have to, using the created application, you will be able to connect by just creating a session object. It is a UA client session object, and you have to set a name for that object. The connect method is the one who will invoke the connect request on the server side, and it will establish a session. The project is configured for a console application, and it's using some commands. I've started. Okay, so we have a small console application who is able to connect, disconnect, and do some basic OPC UA functionalities like reading and writing notes. The connect method is just invoking a connect with default configuration parameters. So if I'm going to make a test now and just issue a connect, right now it's trying to connect to UA demo server, and in case everything is okay, the status of the connection should be connected, current state active. So in this case, we should have an active session from our demo client application. Oh, sorry. Okay, so yeah. The further step after establishing a connection is to invoke functionalities. Also, there is the disconnect method. For disconnecting, you just have to call disconnect and dispose the session object. So one of the basic operations for a client is to read some data from the server side. And for that, it will have to issue a read service call. For a read service call, you have to first prepare the read request. And that means defining the node and the attribute you are intending to read. In this case, I'm reading the value attribute for the current time of the server, and that is a predefined OPC UA node. For instance, this one. So invoking a read request for this node is just preparing the request, setting the node ID and the attribute, and calling the read method. The read method will return a data value object containing the value, status code, and timestamps of the result. I'm going to make a test as well for this. So first connect. If everything is okay, I have a running session, and then read. If the read request was processed correctly, you will get a good status code and the value inside. So right now we were able to make a read request for a single attribute. Another option is to read a list of attributes in a single request, and for that you will have to prepare a list of read value IDs, just like this. And once you have the list, you just invoke another read method where you will get a list of results. The difference is that on the second case, you don't have to issue multiple read requests. You just prepare a request with a list of read value ID and send it in a single service call. The response will be an array of results of data values. Another option is to read all the attributes for a single node. In this case, you will have to call a read node method, and depending on the node class, you will get in the result an instance of a base node object that can be a variable, a method, an object, depending on the node class of the requested node ID. In our case, I think I'm trying to read the server status node. Connect and read. So in the result, I should get a variable node with all the attributes of the requested node ID. So in this case, I get display name, browse name, description, value, data types, all the attributes of the node ID that was read. Okay, another operation is writing data on the server side. For writing nodes, you will first need to have a node ID that is writable, so it should have write access. For that, I'm trying to write a node that it's in the demo server and for instance, CTT's dynamic, where is it? Static all profiles, scalar. Yeah, I'm trying to read one of these nodes, to write one of those nodes. In the request for a write operation, you also have to set together with node ID and attribute ID the value of the write request. In this case, it's an integer value, and this is all it needs for a write request. After setting the write request parameters, you will have to call the write method. The write method will return a status code specifying if the request was processed correctly or not. In this case, I'm gonna make a try. Yeah, if the write result is okay, you should also see the node updated on the server side. It was int 32, and in this case, int 32 was updated in the server. Another operation is subscribing for data changes. Oh, sorry. Also for the write request, you can send an array of write values. All you need to do is create a list and then send it in a single write request. That will issue multiple write requests in a single service call. And that's okay. So back to creating some monitor items and subscribing to data changes. For subscribing to data changes and monitor item notification, there is two steps. First, you will have to create one subscription object, and that subscription object will be the base for further creating monitor items. For creating a subscription object, first of all, you will need to have a running session. So the first step is to create a running session, and on top of the session, you will have to create a subscription object. Subscription object, it's a client subscription. The input is the session and a name. You will further have to set also the publishing interval for that subscription, and that can be set with the publishing interval property. And for this, connect and create a subscription. If the subscription is connected, you will see publishing interval and the state should be active. In this case, the subscription should be also created on the server side. So we have for data client session one subscription without monitor items. After the subscription is created, you will further be able to set some other parameters like the publishing interval or the publishing mode while the subscription is active. But normally you will just create a subscription in an active state, and on top of the subscription object, you will have to add monitor items. Okay, stop. So creating monitor items. will first require to have a node ID that you want to monitor. In this case, I just monitor a dynamic simulated node ID from demo server. Dynamic. Sure, it's in profile Scala, for instance, one of these. And our server is just simulating some random values for those nodes. And I will try to create a monitor item on that node. So one of the steps is to define the node ID. The further step is to define a notification event and a handler for the data changes notification from the server. And for that, you need to subscribe to data changes received event handler of the monitor item object. And inside the event handler implementation, you will have to process the data change notifications. You will get a list of data change notifications, but for monitor items objects, normally you will see a single value in this list. We have a list because the same notification is used for subscription objects, and for that you can receive a list with multiple data changes inside. Okay. For the same subscription object, you can also create a list of monitor items. There is no limitation of the numbers, so normally you can add multiple monitor items in the same subscription. They will use the same publishing interval of the subscription object, but they can have different intervals for the sampling. So one of the items can have a sampling interval, for instance, of 1000 milliseconds. The second one can have a sampling of 2000 milliseconds. In this case, the sample time used on the server side for sampling data changes is different, but it will use the same publishing interval of the subscription. And I will run it. Okay. So the session is created. The next step is to create a subscription object. Subscription is created. In this moment, the subscription it's in a state that it's not generating data change notifications because there is no monitor items assigned. And the further step is to create monitor items. So we have first monitor item and the second. And right now, our application is receiving data change notification from the server for the created monitor items. Okay. The further step in your development of the client application is to implement a better logic here for the handling of the data change notifications. Maybe you will have to use it for to display it on a window or somewhere else, but you are just using the stack data changes receive notification to get the value from the server with this example. Okay. Also, for the monitor items, even if they are in the created state, you can still change some of the parameters. For instance, one of them is the sampling interval. This one cannot be changed, but another's. So even if the monitor item is created on the server side, you can change some parameters, or you can also put it in the idle state by setting the triggering mode to disabled. But normally in a client application scenario, you just have to create the item and wait for data change notifications. Also, for setting a subscription in the idle state, you will just need to call the disconnect method. And this will delete the subscription from the server side, but it will keep it only in the client side with the configured monitor items. Again, this is normally not so used. You just create the subscription and add monitor items inside it. Okay. Another operation you can do is to invoke method calls. For invoking a method call, you will first need to have a method node on the server side. In our case, we have some methods in our demo server. Here, one of them. And you also need to know the node identifier of the method node and the expected input and output parameters. So a pre-configured knowledge is needed on the client application side before invoking a method. In this case, I'm calling the methods optional. Yeah, I'm trying to call this method. It has no input and input argument. It only has some output arguments. And for invoking a method call request, you have to use the session call method, sending the object ID, that is the parent node of the method, the node ID of the method, some input arguments. If there is no input arguments, you can send an empty list and receive output arguments from the server. And I'm gonna make a test for this. So connect and invoke method call. After the method call was invoked, you will get a status code as the result of the session call. If everything is okay, you get a good status code. Otherwise, you will get a hint with a bad status code inside. In case you will have some requested input arguments for your method node, you will have to set here inside the input arguments parameter the list of values for the input of the method. For instance, when calling a method with, so yeah, you will also need to know the data value of the requested input arguments. In this case, is an integer or double. So for a method call with input arguments, in case I call this, you will have to set integer and double. And double. In the array of data, sorry. Okay. And that should be fine. So in this case, I'm sending some input arguments for the method. Very important is to also know the data type of the arguments. In this case, one integer and a double. And we can try to issue another method call. Here we go. And if everything is okay, I get a good result. If something is wrong inside the request, for instance, you do not set the correct input arguments, like I do now, you can expect to receive a bad status code from the server side. In this case, it's bad arguments missing. So if something is wrong in the request, you will get a bad status code from the server side. Sorry. Okay, another operation you can further do is making a browse on the server. For browsing browsing the server, you will first need to know a starting point for the browse operation. In this case, I'm going to use the standard server node for our browsing, and it is a predefined OPC UA node ID with node identifier 2253. You already have it in the list of predefined object IDs. After defining the node to browse, you will be able to invoke the session browse method for that node. The browse result is an array of reference description, and for each reference description object, you will have some information like display name, node class, browse name, node ID, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm going to make a test also for the browse operation. So I connect and browse. So if everything is okay, you will get inside the result all the references for that node. You can further display them on your user interface. And this is browsing with the default parameters of the session object. There is also an option to browse with some specific filtering. For instance, you can browse only for some specific type of nodes from your starting point. So the server will remove from the browse results the results that are not passing the filters. In this case, I'm going to make a test for browsing only for object and variable nodes, but returning also the backward references. So in the reference type ID of a browse filter, I will request all the references, not only hierarchical references by default. And the browse direction is both. For that, you will have to invoke the browse method, but also specifying the filter. Yeah, the node to browse is still the server node, and connect and browse. So the first set of browse results is the default browser results of the server object, and the other set of results is the browse results using the filtering. So on the console, I will get a different set of reference description depending on the filtering I used. Also, for the filtering of the browse request, you also have the option to set the browse filters of the session object. When the session object is created, you will get the default values, but you will be further able to modify them in the session browse description property, and you can change, for instance, the browse direction to be by default to use goat, and this will change the further browse operations that will be invoked on the session object. So when session browse without a specific filter is invoked, it will use the setting on the browse description for the session object. In my case, I set browse description both, and if it's set before calling the browse operation, it will use it for all the further browse requests without setting a filter. And browse. So in this case, I get a higher number of results because it's also returning the backward references. The first set was 23, and now I also get the backward references for the object node. This can be also visible in our dataFEED client application. When invoking a browse request, you are able to change the browse filters. By default is using hierarchical references, but you can set it to all the references and browse direction both, and you will get a different browse result depending on the filters, but default values are hierarchical and forward. It is the same for the client API. You have the session object with default browse filtering, and that are the most common use scenario, and normally that is the request a client is doing. You have two options: to set a different filtering or to set the browse parameters for the session object. Okay, this is pretty much a basic implementation of a client project. You can further do some other UA operation from the client API, for instance, subscribing to another type of monitor items like event monitor items. You can also have the option to, for instance, do the discovery mechanism, but a normal client implementing the data access functionality will usually use only the features from this example. So connecting, reading some data, writing some data, and maybe creating a subscription and monitor items for the subscriptions. So this is pretty much a basic implementation of a client. In case you have questions, just feel free to ask. I see there is some questions already. So what is the question?
That's the first one. Shall I read?
Yeah, you can read.
So the first question, what kind of project is created in Visual Studio for the presenting app, and is the .NET Framework or .NET Core or .NET Standard?
Okay, yeah. For this example, I have configured a project that has multiple targets, and it's configured for .NET Framework 4.6.1 and .NET Core 2.0. In your project, you can also configure it only for a specific target, but this example is providing outputs for both .NET Core and .NET Framework 4.6.1.
So then another one is, how did you create the config file?
I think there is also another. Yeah, how did you create the config file? Yeah, the config file is created from our sample applications, because together with our SDK we also provide some sample projects for client and server, and that is the place where I take the configuration file. It's just a copy with the default values, and normally you only need to change some parameters like your application name, application URI, product URI, and for the security configuration you have the option to change the location where the application certificates are stored, the own application certificate and the trusted list of certificates. Yeah. But you can just take our standard sample client and sample server project and use that configuration file as a base.
Okay.
Possible to demo alarms and events. It is in the same as monitor items. Yeah, for alarms and events, you will have to create a special type of a monitor item, and that is the event monitor item. You will create it for the. You have to create a monitor item for the event notifier attribute, and that instead of triggering data changes notification, that will trigger event notifications. For alarms, you will have to further use the functionality of the method call. So you'll have to call methods for confirming or some actions on the alarm nodes. Okay, something else? Did you check in the read value? Did you check if in the read value is the correct type?
This is not clear.
Yeah, checking for the types in the read value is possible, but you also get a hint from the server side for a specific node what is the data type, and that is the data type attribute of the node. For instance, this one will have an attribute saying what is the data type, but more important is for the data type is in the write request, because for the write request you will have to provide in the request a value with the data type that is exactly the one requested by the server. So it will not accept values with a different data type, even if that can be converted automatically to the target type. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Arlene. So, thank you, everybody. So we have some more questions left here, so we will answer them afterwards by email and come directly to you. So if you have more questions now, feel free to write in the chat window, and we will come back afterwards. I hope you like it. Afterwards, after this webinar is finished, there will be a short survey where we hope you will give us some feedback on this webinar and how we can maybe improve us in the future and what topics you would like to have for a future webinar. Also, this recording is available on the website in a couple of days. So if you would like to rewatch it, feel free to do so. And there was also the question regarding the samples here in this webinar. I think it's more or less the demo client application that comes with our SDK, because it's the same console application. So if you have not done that, please download it and see if this is working for you. Otherwise, maybe write us an email, and then we can give you some hints or send you some files from this webinar. So then I would say, again, thank you, Arlene, and yeah, have a great day, and download the application and test it and come back with us with some questions. So have a nice day. Bye.